It's 1 week from the election, and Kamala Harris will deliver a speech tonight at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. It's a park within view of the White House where Donald Trump addressed supporters on January 6, 2021, moments before they stormed the U.S. Capitol. Brett Samuels, White House reporter for The Hill, joins us to discuss that and more. Brett, lots of discussion about Harris's closing message. Is it protect democracy? Is it more about the economy? What are you expecting to hear from Harris tonight?
Yeah, what we're expecting to hear from the vice president is essentially this broad argument she's made, which is that the country, that she's encouraging the country to turn the page on Donald Trump, essentially. That's her closing message is, that Americans are exhausted by the divisiveness, by the bitterness of the Trump campaign. She wants them to turn the page. Expect to hear that phrase a lot tonight. She's going to sort of contrast her vision with the Trump vision for how to move the country forward, that Trump makes it about him. She wants to make it about the American people. So that's going to be sort of the message, I think, that we hear her hammer home. And obviously, as you mentioned, the Ellipse is sort of a symbolic setting for her to do that.
Is there a struggle within the campaign over, they're having this speech at the same location where Donald Trump delivered that infamous speech on January 6, 2021, but also a lot of times in the opinion polls, voters say it's the economy that's the top issue. What do you think is going on inside the Harris campaign as they weigh, where are we going to put most of our effort in these last few days?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting sort of push and pull, I think, the last couple weeks especially, where you've seen, obviously former Trump administration officials like John Kelly coming out saying that Trump would rule as a dictator, that he meets the definition of a fascist. We've seen that sort of dominate headlines. And so the Harris campaign has had to make this conscious decision to lean into that, to really seize on those comments. Even as you said, a lot of polls have shown that voters want to hear more about her plans for the economy, plans for housing, things like that. So it has been this sort of delicate balance, but certainly I think tonight's speech and its setting is sort of evidence that the campaign does feel comfortable really kind of painting this as a choice about the direction of the country, more so than another speech about her economic plans, for example.
Donald Trump doing a little bit of counter-programming. He's giving a speech. He gave a speech today at his resort in Mar-A-Lago. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Kamala Harris has obliterated our borders, obliterated. We've never had a situation like this. Decimated the middle class, and runaway inflation has caused problems the likes of which we never thought possible. No person has caused so much destruction and death at home and abroad should ever be allowed to be the President of the United States. Can't have that. Can't have that.
You didn't see it in that video, but the speech today and the event with former President Trump featured these families of people that have been killed by undocumented immigrants. This is another case where I think, maybe inside the Trump campaign, they see the economy also as the biggest issue. He leans heavily into the immigration issue. What did you make of what he said today at Mar-a-Lago and more broadly the Trump message in the final week of the campaign?
Yeah, certainly, as you mentioned, he had, an individual, a mother of someone who was killed by an illegal immigrant. He had a small business owner who spoke about being hurt by inflation. Then he had the mother of a Marine Corps sergeant who was killed during the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So really, we're seeing the Trump campaign and the former president lean into this idea that Harris is to blame for the last 4 years, for any of the chaos, any of the missteps of the Biden administration, that is something Harris should be held accountable for. Certainly, we're seeing him lean heavily into this idea that, any of the struggles of the last 4 years, whether it be inflation, whether it be immigration at the southern border, that Harris is to blame. That's sort of the message, is Harris broke it, Trump will fix it, that they're trying to hit. The question, as always with Trump, is can he stick to that message? We saw obviously that Madison Square Garden rally, some other things overshadowed that, and that's always the risk with Trump, is whether he can actually drive home that message succinctly.
Now, Kamala Harris is going to be crisscrossing swing states here in this last week of the campaign, but one of the major questions that a lot of people in the political world are wondering is whether or not she will be doing the Joe Rogan podcast. Trump did it last week, and that's been kind of going viral over the weekend on social media. J.D. Vance, I guess, is going to be sitting down with Rogan tomorrow. Rogan posted on X that he may actually still do this interview with her. The campaign offered Rogan an hour. He wanted more than that. Also said that Rogan would have to travel to her. He wants Harris to come to his studio in Austin, Texas. Do you think the interview could actually happen? And how important is that possibly in the final days of this campaign?
Yeah, at this point I'd be shocked if the interview actually happens. It just seems like the two sides can't really reach an agreement. And I think, to your point a moment ago, I think Harris and her campaign are more interested in getting her to battleground states, using these precious few final days to have her in Pennsylvania, have her in Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Nevada, et cetera, as opposed to doing a sort of trip out of the way to Texas. I've seen some people say, Joe Rogan, he has the chance to interview the Democratic nominee, he should just go to her. But certainly that impasse just seems like it's going to be too much to overcome. Now, obviously it'd be a big untapped sort of market for her. Joe Rogan has millions of subscribers to his podcast, a lot of them young men who she's trying to appeal to, but the Harris campaign has taken other steps to try and bridge that gap. Instead of Joe Rogan, she went on Shannon Sharp's podcast, former NFL player. She's been on podcasts with former NBA players. Tim Walz, her running mate, has been on Sports Talk Radio. He went on the Dan Le Batard show today. So they're sort of trying alternative means. Obviously, Joe Rogan has this huge reach that we're seeing the Trump campaign really capitalize on, but it seems like that's one that the Harris campaign is going to forego.
Now tonight, Donald Trump is going to be in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's interesting because it's one of the areas in Pennsylvania that has one of the largest Latino populations in the state. This comes as the Trump campaign is doing some damage control after a comedian at Trump's weekend rally at Madison Square Garden joked that Puerto Rico was a pile of garbage. That sparked a rare instance where the Trump campaign actually distanced itself from some controversial comments. You don't often see that. J.D. Vance said basically everybody needs to chill. This was just a joke, but the Democrats are really pouncing on this. Do you see this as a pivotal moment in this campaign that could actually have an impact?
Yeah, it's interesting because, this race has been so stagnant for so long. It was kind of this question of what could possibly shake it up. But it does seem like, from what we're hearing, this joke from this comedian at the rally where he targeted Puerto Rico has actually broken through. Certainly, there's been a lot of outrage on the ground from a lot of Latino voters. The Harris campaign, as you said, they quickly turned this into a campaign ad. There's been press conferences from Democratic lawmakers highlighting this. And in Pennsylvania, which is arguably the most important swing state that could determine this election, there's about 500,000 Puerto Ricans living in Pennsylvania. So certainly, if this is breaking through, it could really have an impact with them. We'll see if Trump addresses that at his rally tonight in Allentown. He didn't address it directly during his Mar-A-Lago remarks this morning, but certainly maybe a potential pitfall for the Trump campaign in these
closing days. It's interesting that Harris has already cut an ad from that. It wasn't actually the only insensitive remark that was made during that Madison Square Garden rally. Tucker Carlson said that Harris was Samoan and Malaysian. She is neither. Also said that she was low IQ. Rudy Giuliani made some disparaging comments about Palestinians. Some Republicans do appear to be concerned about this. You heard from Megyn Kelly had some interesting comments on this where she said that basically the Madison Square Garden rally was too bro-y and that they were appealing to a demographic that they're already doing well with. What are you hearing from Republicans as far as whether or not this Madison Square Garden rally was over the top and could potentially hurt Trump and other Republicans?
Yeah, from what I've heard from even some folks who are kind of close to Trump, they feel like this was sort of an own goal almost, that this was, they took an unnecessary risk by putting some of these people on stage. The comedian Tony Hinchcliffe in particular, his comments about Puerto Rico have caused a stir. They mentioned Tucker Carlson. You had one speaker who said Harris was the devil and the Antichrist. So we've seen even Peter Navarro, for example, who's a really strong Trump ally, former Trump administration official. He came out and said that it was a mistake to put this guy on stage, Tony Hinchcliffe. So certainly I think it's making some Republicans nervous that at a time when they really felt confident heading into Election Day, that maybe this does give Democrats an opening to sort of, create some momentum.
Donald Trump is pushing back on some comments from former Trump administration officials who have labeled him a fascist and talked about that Trump said that he had an admiration for Adolf Hitler. What is Trump saying in response to these accusations? And also Melania Trump, the former First Lady, was on Fox and Friends kind of refuting them as well. What are we hearing from both of them?
Yeah, it's been interesting to hear in the last 24 hours them sort of directly addressing these. Trump at a rally in Atlanta said, quote, "I'm not a Nazi, I'm the opposite of a Nazi." Melania Trump, as you mentioned, went on Fox to say that my husband is not Hitler, that these comparisons are wrong. And these comments seem to have kind of gotten under Trump's skin. We heard him again at Mar-a-Lago this morning, sort of scoffing at the idea that Democrats are comparing him to a Nazi or comparing him to Hitler in some way. But it just sort of feeds into, on the one hand, you have Republicans saying that this rhetoric has gone too far, that Trump obviously has been the target of these assassination attempts twice already. But on the other hand, you have Trump himself calling Democrats Democrats the enemy from within. He's calling Harris a Marxist. So it really is just this very heated rhetoric heading into the home stretch, but certainly, again, feeds into what we talked about at the top, this idea that the Harris campaign is leaning into this idea that Trump is, he's a potential danger if he gets into office.
I want to ask you about Jeff Bezos. He is responding to criticism after the Washington Post, which Bezos owns, declined to endorse a presidential candidate. This is the first time that that's happened in decades. The paper was poised to endorse Democrat Kamala Harris. At least 3 members of the editorial board have resigned. According to NPR, the paper lost 200,000 subscribers. Bezos is responding in an op-ed, kind of defending the not making an endorsement, saying that there's been a loss in trust in journalism and the media. Talk to me about what Bezos' argument is.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos has come out and said, he's trying to push back essentially on these criticisms, which have led to a lot of these canceled subscriptions, I think. These criticisms that essentially he had his own business interests in mind in doing this, that he was hedging against the possibility of Trump winning because Trump has obviously threatened Amazon in the past, that Bezos stepped in essentially because he didn't want the backlash should Trump win. And he wrote this op-ed in which he basically said that was not the case, that this was more of a principled decision that he, as he put it, to try and restore trust in the media, that too many Americans already see the media as biased and that newspapers issuing endorsements for political candidates just sort of feeds into that perception of bias. And, while I think that certainly has merit to that argument, certainly the timing coming just a couple weeks before Election Day with Trump sort of having some momentum in the polls and potentially being primed to win has fueled a lot of this criticism, has led a lot of people to think that Jeff Bezos was just looking out for himself and his business interests rather than, the principles of the newspaper that he owns. Yeah,
and he actually apologized for the poor timing of that, but I don't imagine that's going to quell many of the concerns among people who think this was a political decision. But Brett Samuels, thank you so much for joining us. Always great insight.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you. Take a look at this. This is one of the ballot drop boxes, one of them in Portland, Oregon, another in Vancouver, Washington, that were set on fire Monday. A third was reported earlier this month, also in Vancouver. While authorities say fire suppression systems in the Portland drop box limited the damage to just 3 ballots, the fire in Vancouver's drop box Monday destroyed hundreds. Federal authorities say they believe the arsons are related. The FBI and Portland police have launched parallel investigations into the fires. Meantime, elections officials in both Washington and Oregon are working on restoring the ballots that were burned. Ariel Yacobazi with Next Star Nation's KOIN in Portland spoke to one voter who says her ballot was among those destroyed.
Yeah, as an 18-year-old freshly, I was really excited to participate in this election, especially since it's a presidential election.
Maggie Lind is a student at Washington State University and a Camas, Washington native. She recently filled out her first ballot while at school, then made the trek home to drop it off in Vancouver.
Oh, I thought I really lucked out.
But her first voting experience took a turn Monday morning.
And all of a sudden, the family group chat is blowing up talking about the ballot box burning. And he goes, "Sorry, Maggie, I think that was your ballot."
Maggie says her ballot was among the ones burned at 3 voting drop boxes in Vancouver and Portland.
Has something like this ever happened before?
No, this is unprecedented.
Clark County Auditor Greg Kimsey says his office is busy getting new ballots into the hands of the voters affected by the arsons. On top of that, his team at the Elections Office and the Clark County Sheriff's Office will ramp up security at ballot drop sites across the city.
We'll have one person in each ballot box 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, simply to observe what's going on. If they observe something suspicious, they'll be instructed to call 911. They're not there to interact with citizens or to be confrontational in any way whatsoever.
For voters like Maggie, she says she won't let burned ballots stop her from using her voice in this election.
It's really easy to get stuck in that mindset of, oh, one vote won't change anything. But obviously, if everyone thought that way, there wouldn't be voting at all. So just try not to think like that. Don't let other people control your vote.
Ariel Yacobazi with Next Star Nation's KOIN. Portland police have identified a suspect vehicle in the arsons. Police say while they don't know the motive, they say the fires were targeted and intentional. It's been a little over a month since Hurricane Helene ripped through the southeast U.S. The storm dumped nearly 15 inches of rain over 2 days in some areas of western North Carolina and caused widespread flooding across southern Appalachia that devastated the region. For residents, cleanup from the storm has been a slow process. Mariah Ellis with Nexstar Nation's WNCN in Raleigh has the latest on recovery efforts.
Continuous days, continuous weeks. Communities in western North Carolina are doing everything they can to recover from Hurricane Helene.
Access in this place is pretty hard. We're having to use side-by-sides and our pickup trucks to get in and out.
Jared Roddy with Duke Energy recently helped restore power in Chimney Rock State Park. He's one of many continuing to work in western North Carolina, hoping to help areas hit the hardest.
Especially as the cold season is upon us. And, you know, that just is amazing to me that, you know, we can all come together.
We're making progress ahead of schedule at this point. So we are in a better place today than we even expected we might be a week or two ago.
Working since day one, Duke Energy's Jeff Brooks says they've restored power to now 1.4 million customers in North Carolina, 2.7 million across the Carolinas. But he says hundreds of customers are still without.
Some of that has involved a lot of creativity, using helicopters to bring in utility poles into hard-hit areas. When your facility is not safely able to receive power, we can't reconnect that power until repairs are made and inspections are done.
Bat Cave, Lake Lure, Spruce Pine, Spindell. Brooks says there are all areas where crews continue to navigate around inaccessible roads, damaged infrastructure. For some of their customers, it's the loss of entire homes.
So we're doing assessments in the parks.
North Carolina State Parks Director Brian Strong says some of that power returned at Chimney Rock State Park late last week, but 13 units of the state park system remain closed west of I-77.
This is about the communities too, and we want to be sensitive to the communities, not opening where they're not ready.
Brooks says temporary substations are providing some immediate relief, but says it could take weeks, even months, to finish permanent repairs. Mariah Ellis, CBS 17 News.
And that's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.